All right, welcome back to the Atlas Hour. Actually, this will be Atlas Info. We have attorney Rick Collins here. Rick is a master of all things hormones, supplements, steroids. Rick's entire legal practice is basically dedicated to this. And today we wanted to talk to him about the DEA update. A few months back, there was a lot of roar about the DEA potentially ending telehealth. And then people had things so wrong where they were saying you had to be seen every 30 days. And there was a lot of uproar. Things are now changed, though. We got an update about 2 weeks ago, I believe. And so wanted to kind of get Rick on here to talk about that real quick. So maybe you can kind of elucidate what's going on with this whole telemedicine space right now.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I don't know where a lot of that stuff came from, that every 30 days see your doctor thing really was a complete misinterpretation. Nothing ever said that. And it's amazing. It's almost like a game of telephone that takes place when, one podcaster or one influencer puts something up. And then the next thing you know, it becomes gospel as it gets passed down by others. So the good news is that was never, ever any way near what the proposed DEA rule said. And it's a good cautionary warning for all of us to not always rely on what we read from an influencer on social media. To give just a little bit of background for those who aren't following it, back in 2008, there was a law put into place that said basically that you have to have an in-person meeting, some kind of face-to-face in-person medical examination with a physician before you can get prescribed a controlled substance. And the idea behind that had nothing to do with TRT, had nothing to do with hormones, nothing to do with testosterone. It was because an 18-year-old kid went online, got Vicodin from a doctor that he never met, never saw in person, and then he overdosed. Tragic result, terrible thing. When these sorts of things happen, Congress takes note and sometimes wants to take some action. So that's what they did. They passed this law in order to prevent kids or others from getting opiates or other types of narcotics or painkillers online without ever being evaluated in terms of medical need or appropriateness. So that it kind of made sense, right? What I don't think anybody who was promoting that law was thinking about was that there are these other things that are controlled substances that are not painkillers, that are not psychoactive drugs. They're primarily athletic or cosmetic drugs, and it's testosterone and anabolic steroids. And so testosterone got kind of lumped into the effect of that law. And that lasted up until 2020, when suddenly we had the national health emergency, global emergency, and there was a specific exemption in that 2008 law that said if it's a national health emergency, then we will put on ice, we'll put on hold that requirement for an in-person medical evaluation. So that went into place during the health emergency. And so there wasn't that aspect of an in-person evaluation was not being enforced while that was going on. So for basically 3 years, there was an exemption in place. So when the Biden administration basically said that the pandemic will end on May 11th, well, then the question was, okay, well, then what happens now? Especially when a lot of people started their prescriptions for controlled substances during a time when the inpatient medical evaluation wasn't being enforced. And of course, everybody in the TRT community went nuts. I saw a lot of stuff basically thinking that this is a purposeful, intentional end to TRT. This is all about TRT. They're trying to end it. And I think that's kind of like we're in a place culturally and nationally where everything is about you. If it affects 100%. You, it was intended specifically for you. And that was never the case. But of course, testosterone got lumped into it. And so there was a lot of concern and a lot of misinformation. Ultimately, there were lots of comments made to DEA. I'm sure from the TRT community, but also from the opiate and pain killing and addiction recovery folks who were saying that the change suddenly reverting back to the way it was not going to be good for a lot of people, not good for addiction recovery. And so DEA ultimately just announced in the Federal Register a couple of weeks ago, okay, we're going to think about this. We're going to put a little time into it. We're going to keep things as they are for now, at least until November. And if you started your prescription during this time of national health emergency or up until November, then we're going to give it an extra year. So it'll be November of 2024. So the urgency of the issue is, at least the wolf is no longer at the door, so to speak. Right. But it's it's certainly there's pros and cons to the idea of an in-person medical examination. If it does go back, even if it went back to the way it was before, it's not an every 30-day thing. It's basically a one-time thing, just to make sure that before the doc prescribes you a powerful opiate or Vicodin, that you're not some 17 or 18-year-old kid who shouldn't have it in the first place. So I'll keep people updated as you know, and we follow each other. I'm on Instagram at Rick Collins ESQ. If there's anything that changes this situation, I will post it there as we get closer to November. If there's some new information from DEA, I'll certainly post it. And then come November of 2024, by then I think we'll have some clarity on where we're going to be moving forward.
Awesome. So yeah, just to summarize, it's back to how it was during the public health emergency up until November 2023. If you start with an online clinic between now and November 2023, or throughout this whole thing, you then have another year grace period before they implement anything. And then even if they do implement anything, this is what I tell people, is it doesn't seem that bad to me. At least patients of ours at Merrick, we have always required a once a year in-person evaluation. We won't see you unless you've gone to a doctor and gotten a physical, because we don't know, maybe you have a heart murmur or something, and giving you testosterone might not be the best thing. So we need you to be physically seen. That's why we've had this requirement. We did think that this would eventually come back, but it also just makes sense. Why wouldn't you want to evaluate the patient in person? The only difference now, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we just have them get a physical and come back and show us the physical. They would have to get the physical, but also get a referral to us. Is that correct?
So there's a little bit of complexity to the process, and there were a lot of complaints about that. So that if we're not going to do an in-person medical evaluation by the doctor who's actually the prescriber, there's a mechanism where a referring physician, so let's say the clinic is in Florida, the prescribing physician is in Florida, but the patient lives in Michigan. And so, and for whatever reason, doesn't want to jump on a cheap flight to Florida once a year, soak up a little sun, and get his evaluation and fly home. Oh, okay. So that guy can see a physician who's DEA licensed in Michigan, who's willing to do this, and do the full medical evaluation, and then in some sort of a audio visual, maybe a Zoom or a Teams meeting with the physician in Florida, make that transfer in real time, audio visual digital world. So that was during the course of that was being proposed by the DEA in their proposed rule as an alternative. Some people didn't like it. Some people say, well, how many DEA licensed physicians in Michigan and want to go through this whole rigmarole just to give a prescription to another doctor? I get all those issues. And some of that, I think, is what DEA is going to reconsider and think about what makes sense.
Yeah. So if you guys are concerned about this, if you're being seen now, you don't have to worry about it until November 2024. Even at that point, like Rick just pointed out, it was still just a proposal. They were putting it out there. They never said that this is for sure. And now they've gotten feedback. From what I've heard from the DEA, they take these comments very seriously. They're mandated by law to read each and every one of them and then come up with a new proposal or a new law. So we will know, and hopefully this doesn't go through. And then Also, when it comes to TRT, I mean, there's TRT clinics on every corner. I don't know why people are freaking out. Like they think that they're never going to have testosterone again. I'm like, I mean, there's as many TRT clinics in my town as there are Starbucks at this point.
Wow.
So if you started, I think you can find somebody in person. I hope that we don't lose patients and things at Merit, but I would just want people to calm down. Don't get so worried. It's okay these days. I think eventually we'll get to a place too where hopefully it's not even controlled. We can talk about that, or we'll talk about that in our other podcast. So thank you so much, Rick. I hope this was educational for you guys, and watch the other podcast with Rick that we have up.